I'm Jason Stoneback. I'm a product specialist for Neptune Technology Group. This is the second part of the TRUFLO breakdown session on the 3-inch TRUFLO compound. Before we break down the cover assembly, I think it's important to mention a few of the traits that are here on the main case. Cast in, you can see a directional arrow. You can also see the calibration vane and a plus and a minus letting you know which way to calibrate the meter, up or down. And if I remove the two registers from the top of the cover, it'll expose the bayonets. To do so, you have to remove the seal pin, which has already been removed from my meter, and turn each register a quarter turn. As you can see, my cover's been cut away for display purposes, but on top, below the registers, you can see disc and turbine. That lets you know which side to put each register on. For the breakdown session, I'm going to set it on top of the cover where the registers used to sit. That way I can access both the turbine and the disc. First, we're going to remove the disc from the cover assembly. To do so, all you'll need is a flat screwdriver. I'm going to remove the 4 screws, and this will open up and show us the disc portion of the meter. I've removed the 4 screws from the bottom of the chamber plate, rather. And now I should be able to pick this up, and if you can notice, one side is chamfered. This chamfer feature aligns with the bridge portion on the back of the cover. After you remove that, you can expose the rubber gasket. Then you'll see a white strainer and the chamber assembly. To remove the white strainer, you can do one or two ways. There's a tab in the back of the chamber that you can lift up on the strainer, or you can lift up from another portion. Just take a screwdriver and slightly turn below it, and then you can remove the strainer from the assembly. After doing that, you can take the chamber out by slightly jostling the chamber and lifting straight up. Now, my chamber has been cut for display purposes, so mine comes apart a little easier, but this is just a snap fit, and we're going to remove this and show you the different components. The first component will be the gasket that forms the seal for the chamber, the upper chamber assembly, the ball and disc, which also houses the thrust roller, a diaphragm, and the lower chamber assembly. Now, to put this back together is pretty simple. You can see the slot on the lower chamber where the diaphragm rests. Just make sure you line with the wall of the diaphragm facing to where you can see a groove for the thrust roller. I'll take the ball and disc, I'll put the thrust roller in the hole that's machined in. Once you have these together, you can place it in the lower chamber. And then take your upper housing and slide it, and it has a mating groove for that diaphragm. Once you get this together, you should hear it snap, and then you can put the gasket back in that seals the chamber to the cover. So all this is together, and you're going to place the magnet facing down. There is a machined surface inside the main case. This is where that gasket rests to form the seal. There's also an opposing notch that we removed the strainer from earlier, and an opposing half moon on the back side that locks in the strainer and the chamber assembly. So to put that back in, we're going to take the chamber. You can grab it from the bottom of that ring, placing that sealing surface towards that machined area. Once you have it in, you want to align the feature on the chamber with that half moon and slide your strainer in to lock it in. Once the chamber is locked in, the gasket should be firmly against this side of the cover, and the strainer should be flush with the top of that groove. Now you can place your gasket back in place, again making sure everything is flush with the top of the machine surface here, and then replace your chamber plate. To replace chamber plate, make sure that chamfered end that we talked about is towards the bridge, and once you complete these steps, you can put the 4 screws back in, and you're done breaking down the chamber portion of the TRUFLO compound. We completed tightening the chamber plate for the chamber assembly. And now we're going to remove the turbine and break it down. To do so, you'll need a 7/16 wrench, and you'll have to remove the 4 bolts holding the turbine in. To remove it, you just loosen all 4 of your bolts. Once you get them loosened, you can just take your fingers and remove all 4 of the bolts and set them aside. We've removed the 4 bolts from the turbine assembly, but before we can remove the turbine, we actually have to move the calibration vane out of the way. You can see a long, thin blade on the calibration vane. To get it out of the way to remove the turbine, we have to loosen the calibration nut. To do so, you can roll it up on its side, and mine's already loose, but you'd loosen the calibration nut, bring it to the top thread. Once you get to the top thread, you can pick the calibration vane up and turn it towards the outside of the assembly so the long blade is facing away from the turbine. Once you do that, you can pick your turbine up, protective sheath that goes over the magnet drive, magnet gear coupling, stainless steel drive, and of course the magnet assembly. That completely breaks down everything from the main case, but we'll go a step further and we're going to break down the turbine assembly. There's 3 screws that hold the turbine assembly together. To take this apart, you don't have to take the screws all the way out. You can just loosen them so the 2 chambers can come apart, or the 2 halves can come apart. And I'll do that now. I've loosened the 3 screws to the turbine assembly, and you see this inlet side and the outlet side here. Now I can remove these 2 halves. I will set the inlet down. Here we have the turbine assembly. If you pull the turbine out, or the rotor of the turbine out, you can see a geared portion of the rotor assembly, which mates with the gearbox on the outlet side. And you can see mine's cut away, exposing some of the gears inside of the gearbox. Once you've done that, you've pretty much broke down the whole turbine assembly, and we'll put it back together, making sure that we place that black gear back inside of that gearbox, and then take the inlet side of the turbine assembly and place it back. There's a mating hole for that shaft to fit into. And then we'll tighten our 3 screws back to hold the assembly complete. We have tightened 3 screws on the turbine assembly, and it's now back together. Before we can put the turbine back in, we have to recomplete the magnet drive. I've got the magnet assembly in my hand. The stainless steel shaft has 2 D shapes. So you place the D shape into the magnet drive, hit the drive coupling, which has a D shape and a square shape, making sure the D shape goes towards the stainless steel shaft. The square keyed hole will actually go and mate inside the turbine assembly. We'll take the protective sheath, slide it on the magnet drive. Once you have this assembly together, you can place it inside the turbine assembly. To do so, there's a hole on the bottom of the turbine where the square key on the magnet coupling will lock the magnet drive to the turbine assembly. So we'll slide it up, and you'll feel it lock in. You can move the magnet back and forth, knowing that you've got an engagement between the magnet drive and the turbine assembly. To place this back in the assembly, you can see the machine magnet area where the magnet assembly will go into. While taking your finger and holding the bottom of the magnet drive, facing the seal to the main valve towards the chamber side of the cover, you'll place the turbine back in. So sliding that down. Once you line that, the feet of the turbine should sit on the cover. But if you remember, we've moved the calibration vane to leave the long side out. We'll have to put the calibration vane back in place, and you'll do so just by slightly lifting up on the turbine and on the calibration vane so that it's back in place. Now, before you tighten your calibration vane, it's important that you set the calibration vane to the center. That way you know you have it in the middle of the calibration. For the meter, So once you do that, you can go to the other side of the meter and tighten down the calibration vane. Once you have the calibration vane tight, you can replace the 4 bolts that hold in the turbine assembly. And we'll do that now. I finished tightening the 4 bolts that hold the turbine assembly onto the cover. Now we're going to put our cover back into our main case. The main case, making sure that when you replace a gasket, to make sure the surface is clean as well as the one on the cover, and placing the gasket. There's 2 roll pins on the main case and like holes on the cover gasket. So once you place this gasket in, the cover slides in, and it also has holes for the roll pins to slide in. So now that we have our cover on our main case, we'll replace the registers, making sure that when you replace your registers that you put the turbine on the turbine side and the disc on the disc side, and to make sure the sizes match for the meter. Once you have these locked in, be sure to insert a seal pin to keep the register secure and to keep it from being tampered with on the meter. Now we have the main case and the cover all back together. We have a completed TRUFLO compound assembly. Only thing lacking is putting our bolts in, and that would complete the process.